Have you ever been forced to give up something just because someone else believed they were more important than you? A seat, an opportunity, or even your dignity. On what seemed like an ordinary flight, a black woman stepped into the first-class cabin and settled into the seat she had booked well in advance. But just minutes later, another passenger, a white woman with an air of entitlement, arrived and claimed that seat as her own. With a polite yet chilling smile, the woman spoke, "There must be a mistake. I always sit in seat 1A. A flight attendant appeared. A confrontation began. But this was never just about a seat. It was about something much bigger, how an entire system responds to power and privilege. As every eye in the first-class cabin turned toward this brewing conflict, no one could have predicted that one phone call would change everything. So what really happened? Who had the real authority here? And what led to someone being escorted off the plane in complete humiliation? Stay with us until the end to uncover a story not just about fairness and dignity, but about how one woman stood her ground to prove that respect is not a privilege, it is a right. Maya Carter leaned back into her seat, exhaling softly. The low hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin, blending with the calm atmosphere of first class. After a long, grueling week of back-to-back meetings, this was a rare moment of peace she could finally savor. Maya was never one to indulge in luxury without reason. But seat 1A on this flight wasn't just a seat. It was a symbol of everything she had worked for. She came from a hard-working family, where every success had to be earned, not given. As a little girl, she had watched planes soar across the sky, leaving white trails behind them, and dreamed of one day sitting in one. Not as just another passenger, but as someone who had the power to choose the best seat for herself. And now, that dream had become reality. She closed her eyes for a moment, embracing the comfort of the plush leather seat, the cool air brushing against her skin, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the cabin. A flight attendant approached, setting a chilled glass of sparkling water on the small table beside her. Maya smiled in thanks, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. This trip was important, a pivotal moment in expanding her company into international markets. She had earned this. But what Maya didn't know was that her right to this moment was about to be challenged in a way she never expected. But that peace didn't last long. The sharp click-clack of high heels echoed through the cabin, stopping right in front of Maya's row. She slowly opened her eyes, meeting the gaze of a blonde woman impeccably dressed, her designer handbag dangling from her arm. The woman stood there, eyes narrowing in clear disapproval, as if she had just seen something that didn't belong. Then, with a thin, almost rehearsed smile, she spoke. "I think there's been a mistake. This is my seat." Maya looked up, calm and composed. The woman's posture radiated an overconfidence Maya had seen too many times before, the kind of confidence built not on merit, but on privilege. She set her glass of water down on the small table beside her and responded steadily. "I don't believe there's a mistake. This is my seat, 1A. The woman pursed her lips, then forced another smile, this time a little tighter. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced down at the boarding pass in her hand, pretending to double-check something. But Maya could see right through it. She wasn't verifying her ticket. She was looking for a way to manipulate the situation. "Ah, I see what happened," the woman finally said, nodding slowly, as if piecing together a puzzle. Her voice was controlled, almost patronizing. "But you see, I'm a Platinum Elite member. I always get seat 1A. This must be a minor system error. If you'd like, I can have a flight attendant find you another seat, still in first class, of course." Maya blinked, unfazed. She had expected this the moment the woman appeared. But what intrigued her wasn't the offer itself. It was the way it was made. The woman's words weren't a suggestion. They were a directive, a demand, wrapped in the polite facade of generosity, the kind of disguised authority that people like her often used when they believed they were inherently more important. Maya crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly as she studied the woman with quiet curiosity. "You're right," she said gently. "There may have been a mistake. But if there was, it wasn't mine. I booked this seat in advance, and I intend to stay exactly where I am." The woman's forced smile started to fade. The air of self-assuredness she carried shifted into frustration. "You don't understand." Her voice turned sharper. "I'm a loyal customer of this airline. I always get priority seating. You must have booked this last minute or received an upgrade." Maya inhaled slowly. She had met women like this before, in boardrooms, at networking events, even during business negotiations. People who walked into a room and immediately assumed they belonged at the top. People who believed that certain spaces were never meant to be shared with people like her. Maya reached into her bag, pulled out her boarding pass, and held it up in front of the woman. "I booked this seat 3 weeks ago," she said, emphasizing each word. Her voice remained calm, yet sharp. "Seat 1A is mine. If you have a problem with that, feel free to speak with a flight attendant." The woman opened her mouth, ready to argue, but before she could say anything, a voice cut in from behind her. "Is there a problem here?" A male flight attendant in a crisp uniform stepped forward, his eyes flicking between the two women. A gold name tag pinned to his chest read, "Greg." The woman immediately turned to him, as if she had just found her savior. "Yes, there is a mix-up," she announced, her tone brimming with confidence. "This seat is supposed to be mine. I'm a valued Platinum Elite member, and I always sit here." She gestured toward Maya with a slight tilt of her chin, "must have received a last-minute upgrade. I need my seat reassigned immediately." Maya remained silent, simply holding her boarding pass in her hand, the only proof she needed. Greg hesitated, glancing from Maya to the woman, and in that single moment of hesitation, everything became clear. The shift in power was subtle but undeniable. Greg's grip tightened around the iPad used to check seating assignments, his expression uneasy. He was caught in a dilemma. On one side was Evelyn Stokes, a Platinum Elite member, someone who could leave highly influential feedback about his service. On the other side was Maya Carter, a passenger with undeniable proof of her rightful seat, yet someone who lacked the unspoken privilege that Evelyn carried. For a few seconds, the silence stretched, heavy with unspoken tension. "Ma'am," Greg finally spoke, but he didn't address Evelyn. He turned to Maya. "Could I see your boarding pass again?" Maya said nothing. She simply lifted the ticket slightly higher, allowing him to read her name and seat number. In that moment, Maya understood. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about the system itself. And now she knew, the real game had just begun. Maya could see Greg struggling to find a way out of this situation, but the truth was undeniable. He took a deep breath, then turned to Evelyn. "Ma'am, seat 1A was booked by Miss Carter 3 weeks ago. There is no error in the system." Evelyn's eyes widened in disbelief. For a brief moment, the confidence she had worn so effortlessly cracked, replaced by a mixture of confusion and anger. "That's impossible," she snapped, her voice louder than before. "Are you sure? I always sit here. Check again." Greg kept his voice neutral. "I've already checked, Miss Stokes. If you'd like, I can assist you in finding another first-class seat." "No," Evelyn cut him off sharply. "I don't want another seat. I want this one. It's mine." Maya blinked slowly, studying Evelyn in silence, the same way she had studied countless people like her before. People who believed the world revolved around them, who assumed that rules could be bent with the right mix of pressure and entitlement. She tilted her head slightly. "You seem very convinced this is your seat," Maya said, her voice soft but laced with something sharp beneath the surface. "I'm curious, what makes you think that? Don't all passengers book their seats the same way?" Evelyn whipped around to face Maya, as if she had just struck a nerve. "I'm not just any passenger," she emphasized each word. "I am a VIP. I always get priority." A heavy silence settled over the first-class cabin. A few passengers discreetly glanced over, pretending to be engrossed in their magazines and tablets, yet clearly hanging on to every word. Greg was visibly uneasy, caught between two forces. He didn't want to upset Evelyn, but he also couldn't openly ask Maya to give up a seat she had rightfully booked. Finally, he reached for the only solution that would relieve him of making a decision himself. "Perhaps we should call the flight supervisor to handle this situation," Greg suggested, his voice carefully composed. Evelyn folded her arms, her lips pressing into a firm line. "Good. I want to speak to whoever is in charge here." Maya simply smiled, a small, knowing smile. She said nothing more, because she knew that the further Evelyn pushed, the deeper she was falling into a trap of her own making. The flight supervisor arrived, a middle-aged woman with the composed demeanor of someone who had handled countless in-flight conflicts. The name tag on her crisp uniform read, Deborah Lane. She took in the situation with a single sweeping glance, then exhaled slowly. All right, can someone tell me what's going on here? The real battle had just begun. Deborah stepped into the first-class cabin, her sharp eyes flicking between Maya and Evelyn before landing on Greg, who stood awkwardly between them. All right, she repeated, her voice even but firm. Someone explain to me what's happening. Evelyn seized the moment. She turned dramatically, planting her hands on her hips as if she were presenting an urgent case. This seat is supposed to be mine, she said, her voice dripping with frustration. I always sit in 1A, but today, someone else is in my seat. I informed the flight attendant, but he refused to help me. I demand my seat back immediately. Deborah remained silent for a moment, her gaze never leaving Evelyn. Years of experience had taught her one thing. She could always tell the difference between a real problem and a person creating a problem. She turned to Maya. Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass? Maya didn't hesitate. She lifted her ticket and held it out. She didn't need to argue. The truth was already right there in plain sight. Deborah examined the ticket carefully, then slowly nodded. Seat 1A belongs to Miss Carter, she said, her voice firm. There is no system error. The truth was undeniable, but Evelyn refused to accept it. This can't be right, Evelyn hissed, her face flushing red with anger. I've flown with this airline hundreds of times. I'm a loyal customer. How could someone else be in my seat? Deborah crossed her arms. Her patience was wearing thin. Miss Stokes, she said slowly, I understand that you are a valued customer, but seats are assigned on a first-booked, first-served basis. Miss Carter reserved this seat in advance, which means it rightfully belongs to her. Evelyn bit her lip, then lowered her voice, trying to find another angle, another way to shift the situation in her favor. But I could still sit here, if she agrees to switch seats, right? Evelyn turned to Maya, a glint of challenge in her eyes. Perhaps you don't understand, but I have a lot of connections with this airline. If you agree, I can ensure you receive some very generous perks in the future. What started as a request had now turned into a veiled threat. Evelyn was no longer just asking. She was trying to leverage her status to pressure Maya into compliance. But Maya didn't flinch. She leaned back in her seat, arms crossed, studying Evelyn carefully. That's interesting, Maya said slowly. First, you claimed this was your seat, but now you're trying to negotiate. I have to wonder, if you truly had the right to sit here, why do you need my permission? The power dynamic shifted. Evelyn's grip tightened on her designer handbag, her jaw clenching. You're making this unnecessarily difficult, she snapped. She was losing control. The calm, composed demeanor she had started with was beginning to crack, replaced by frustration and impatience. Maya, however, remained as steady as ever. Not at all, she replied, her tone even. I'm simply protecting my rights, just as you're trying to protect yours. Deborah had seen enough. She let out a quiet sigh before turning to Evelyn. Miss Stokes, if you'd like to file a formal complaint, I'd be happy to connect you with customer service after the flight. But right now, I need you to return to your assigned seat so we can proceed with takeoff. For the first time, Evelyn realized she was losing. She stood frozen in place, unable to comprehend how things had spiraled so far out of her control. She scanned the cabin, searching for support from the other passengers. A nod, a glance, anything to validate her outrage. But no one met her eyes. They were all suddenly too engrossed in their phones, their magazines, anything but this confrontation. And then, Evelyn looked at Maya. There was something in her gaze, something undeniable. She had lost. But instead of conceding defeat, she threw Maya one last piercing look of defiance. You're going to regret this, she murmured, just loud enough for Maya to hear. Maya simply smiled. She lifted her glass of sparkling water, took a slow sip, then set it down gently. I'll let you try, she said. And just like that, Evelyn pulled out her phone. She wasn't calling to file a complaint. She was calling someone with influence, someone she believed could turn this entire situation in her favor. Maya didn't flinch. She remained seated, composed, but she knew this fight wasn't over yet. Evelyn gripped her phone tightly, her lips pressing into a firm line. She spun on her heel and marched toward the front of the first-class cabin, her sharp, clipped tone cutting through the air as she spoke into the receiver. "Do you have any idea how I'm being treated right now?" she demanded. "I've been flying with this airline for years, and now some nobody thinks they can push me aside?" She paused, listening to the voice on the other end, then continued, her tone filled with certainty. "I need you to step in, right now." Maya watched Evelyn go, but she wasn't concerned. She had seen people like Evelyn before. The kind who believed a single phone call could rewrite reality, who thought that knowing the right person, pulling the right strings, would make the world bend to their will. But Maya knew better. Deborah Lane, the flight supervisor, watched Evelyn with a flicker of unease crossing her face. She was no stranger to VIP passengers making demands, but there was something different about this moment. Maya moved with purpose. She slowly reached for her phone, not rushed, not anxious, just precise. She dialed a number, lifting the phone to her ear. The call lasted less than a minute. "Marcus, it's me. I'm on flight 827. We have a situation." On the other end, a deep, measured voice responded immediately. "Maya, what's going on?" While Evelyn was using personal favors, Maya was calling someone who actually held power, a senior executive on the airline's corporate board. She spoke calmly, without emotion. "A platinum elite passenger is attempting to pressure me into giving up my seat. The flight crew is hesitating, and I felt it necessary to report this before it escalates further." A silence stretched across the line. Then Marcus's voice dropped, a tone that carried undeniable authority. "Give me their names." Maya smiled faintly, her eyes never leaving Evelyn, who still stood there believing she could turn the situation around. "Greg, the lead flight attendant, supervisor, Deborah Lane, and the disruptive passenger, Evelyn Stokes." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Marcus exhaled slowly. "I'll take care of it immediately." Maya ended the call, setting her phone down as she casually took another sip of her sparkling water. Within 10 minutes, something happened that no one expected. The cabin door opened once again. Two men in tailored suits stepped inside, one holding an iPad, the other carrying a folder of documents. The entire first-class cabin went silent. Everyone felt it, the shift in power. Evelyn looked up, her eyes widening as one of the men walked straight toward her. "Miss Stokes, we need to have a word." The arrogance vanished from Evelyn's face in an instant. Her posture stiffened as she clutched her phone tighter. "I'm busy," she snapped, motioning toward her phone. "Can't you see I'm handling this?" The suited man remained unfazed. "Your call is no longer relevant, Miss Stokes. A decision has been made. You need to exit the aircraft immediately." A stunned silence fell over the cabin. Evelyn staggered back as if she had misheard. "What?" Her voice cracked. "Who do you think you are? You can't kick me off this flight. I'm a VIP. I've spent tens of thousands of dollars with this airline." The second man finally spoke, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "We are well aware of that. However, today, you have violated company policy. You intentionally disrupted flight operations, inconvenienced other passengers, and most importantly, you attempted to coerce another passenger into relinquishing their legally assigned seat. That is unacceptable." Evelyn inhaled sharply, her chest rising with anger. "I will sue all of you," she spat. "I'm calling my lawyer right now." The man barely reacted. "That is your right, but for now, you need to collect your belongings and disembark." A flight attendant appeared, holding Evelyn's designer handbag. And just like that, Evelyn Stokes, the woman who believed the world revolved around her, was escorted off the plane, her heels clicking against the floor in the suffocating silence of first class. Maya said nothing. She simply watched, her expression calm and unreadable, as if she had known this ending from the very beginning. As Evelyn reached the doorway, she whirled around, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. "You'll pay for this," she hissed at Maya. Maya just smiled, lifting her glass once again. "Good luck with that." The doors closed behind Evelyn. For the first time since the chaos began, a strange stillness settled over the first-class cabin. Deborah and Greg exchanged uneasy glances. They both knew their own fates might not be any different from Evelyn's. Deborah hesitated, then stepped toward Maya. She cleared her throat. "Miss Carter, I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience you've experienced today." Maya tilted her head slightly, her her gaze sharp. "Don't apologize to me," she said, her voice soft but undeniably powerful. "Apologize to every passenger who has ever been treated like I was." Deborah swallowed hard. She knew her career might be over before this flight even landed. Maya leaned back in her seat. For the first time since boarding, she finally felt comfortable. Outside the window, the runway stretched ahead. At last, the plane was ready for takeoff. The cabin doors sealed shut, leaving behind a heavy silence that blanketed first class. The other passengers, despite pretending to be busy with their books or phones, couldn't hide their cautious interest in what had just unfolded. Maya remained still, gazing out the window, unbothered. She had seen this scenario play out far too many times. A person of privilege believing they could bend reality to their will, only to be swept away by their own arrogance. But she knew this wasn't over yet. Greg and Deborah stood frozen. The anxiety on their faces was unmistakable. Greg, who had once been so confident when pressuring Maya to move, now clenched his hands together as if awaiting a verdict. Deborah forced herself to regain composure. She cleared her throat before speaking. "Miss Carter." Her voice was controlled but stiff, as if the words weighed heavy on her tongue. "Once again, on behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize. Is there anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable?" Maya set her glass down on the tray beside her. She turned to Deborah and met her gaze directly. "I don't need comfort," she said, her voice low but cutting. "I need fairness." At that exact moment, a flight attendant hurried into first class, holding a tablet in his hands. He leaned toward Deborah, whispering something quickly. Deborah's brows furrowed. She nodded once, then turned to Maya. "There's a call from the corporate board for you, Miss Carter." A tense silence spread through the cabin. Maya lifted her phone and answered, her voice steady. "This is Maya Carter." On the other end of the line was Marcus, the airline executive. "I've received a full report. We deeply regret the way you were treated today." Maya's lips curled slightly. "Regret?" she mused. "Do you think an apology is enough?" There was a brief silence on the line. Then, Marcus spoke with certainty. "Of course not. That's why we've made an immediate decision." Greg and Deborah exchanged nervous glances. They already knew what was coming. Marcus's voice carried the weight of finality. "Effective immediately, Deborah Lane and Greg, the lead flight attendant on this flight, are suspended pending an internal review." Deborah froze. Greg paled. "They will not be serving on this flight any longer. A new crew will be arranged upon landing." The first-class cabin reacted audibly. Some passengers gasped quietly, others exchanged stunned glances. Marcus continued. "And one more thing. We've reviewed Miss Stokes' membership status. Effective immediately, her Platinum Elite privileges have been revoked. She will no longer receive any special treatment from our airline." Evelyn wasn't just removed from the flight. She lost everything she had taken for granted. Maya nodded slightly, satisfied. "That's a good start," she replied. "But you need to do more." There was a pause on the other end. Then Marcus's voice lowered, serious. "We understand, Maya, and I assure you, this will not be the last time we reevaluate our customer service policies." The call ended. Greg and Deborah were instructed to leave the plane immediately. They walked out in silence, their earlier confidence gone. Maya watched them for a moment, then calmly flipped open her notebook. At long last, the plane began rolling down the runway. But she knew, this story wouldn't end when the plane landed. The engines roared to life as the aircraft prepared for takeoff. Inside the first-class cabin, the air remained thick with tension, even though everything had been resolved. Maya closed her eyes, not out of exhaustion, but because she understood. Incidents like this don't end with a single punishment. Passengers whispered among themselves. A middle-aged man in seat 2B leaned toward the person next to him. "Did you see that?" he murmured. "I've never seen someone get kicked off a flight so fast." The cabin doors sealed shut, leaving behind an unspoken weight in first class. Even those who had remained silent throughout the ordeal now realized this wasn't just a dispute over a seat. This was about something much bigger. Meanwhile, Deborah and Greg were gone, their careers possibly beyond repair. A new, younger flight attendant approached Maya, her expression hesitant. "Miss Carter, is there anything I can get for you?" Maya shook her head, taking a slow sip from her glass before setting it down. No, thank you. But just as the flight attendant turned to leave, Maya spoke again. There is one thing you can do, she said. The attendant paused, waiting. Maya's voice was soft, yet it carried through the cabin. Remember this. The entire first-class section seemed to be listening. Remember that no one deserves special treatment just because they think they're more important. And no one should be treated as less just because they don't look like the people who usually sit here. The words settled heavily in the air. Passengers nodded quietly. Some even smiled faintly. The flight attendant took a deep breath, then nodded. I'll remember. She turned and walked away, leaving Maya with a strange sense of peace. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Evelyn Stokes stormed through the airport terminal. Her heels clicked furiously against the polished floors as she pulled out her phone, dialing frantically. She called her lawyer. She called her contacts at the airline, anyone who might help restore her name, her privilege, her power. But for the first time in her life, no one answered right away. She had lost something that money couldn't buy. The respect of the system she once thought would always protect her. Back on the plane, Maya gazed out the window as the aircraft picked up speed. The runway lights blurred past as the wheels lifted off the ground. She exhaled softly, not from exhaustion but because she knew. True change doesn't happen in a single moment. But today, she had won. And this was only the beginning. As the plane soared into the night sky, a quiet realization settled over the passengers. This wasn't just about a denied seat assignment. It wasn't just about a woman losing her privilege or a system that had long favored those with power. This was about fairness. About who gets to sit where, not just on a plane but in society itself. Maya thought about all the times in her life she had to prove her worth, all the moments she had to stand firm when others tried to push her aside. But this time, she didn't have to argue. The truth spoke for itself. And most importantly, people saw it. A middle-aged man in 2B caught Maya's eye and gave her a quiet nod of acknowledgement. A young woman, perhaps flying first class for the first time, looked at her with understanding and admiration. Maybe they wouldn't say anything, but they would remember. And sometimes, that's how the biggest changes begin. The plane disappeared into the clouds, heading toward the horizon. Maya let out a slow breath, then closed her eyes. This time, she could truly rest. A final thought for you. Life isn't always fair, but that doesn't mean we have to accept injustice. Today, Maya stood up for herself, and in doing so, she stood up for everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told they didn't belong. This isn't just a story about a seat on a plane. It's about reclaiming your place in the world. What would you do in Maya's situation? Would you stand up for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you believe that respect isn't a privilege, but a requirement, hit the like button, share this story, and most importantly, subscribe to Aiva Stories so you never miss another powerful, inspiring story like this one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.